Hello again. It was, I suppose, inevitable that when a new stage version of My Fair Lady, set of course in Edwardian London, should be produced, it would be a black woman who would be cast as Eliza Doolittle. She may be seen in the thumbnail to this video. Her name is Amara Okereke. Of course, a black cockney in Edwardian London. Move over, Audrey Hepburn. There were, of course, no black people to be seen in London at that time, other than one or two sailors down in the docks. The whole point of the play is that Eliza Doolittle comes from a long line of cockneys. I wonder if any viewers think that casting a black person in this role was sheer chance, that it just so happened that a black person was the best actress to be auditioned. Of course not. It was a deliberate decision long before casting began. They had decided that a black person would be what they wanted in their production. This is one more example of a trend, which is that British culture should be eradicated wherever possible, and when it cannot be removed entirely, then it must have dirt thrown at it and be presented as somehow tainted or downright wicked. Take the case of David Livingstone, the Scottish doctor, missionary and anti-slavery campaigner. 50 or 60 years ago, David Livingstone was a fantastic role model for children. He was very famous. He came from humble origins and he ended up being one of the most celebrated men in 19th century Britain. Which is, of course, why Ladybird books featured a biography for him. Which, by the way, I observed from reading the back, cost 2 and 6. 12.5 pence in modern money. His life was exemplary and hard. Nobody has ever found any scandal connected with him. And he spent his life helping black people in Africa and fighting there against slavery. Here, you would think, is a man impervious to the cancel culture or accusations of being contaminated by connections with the slave trade. He was working class, fought his way up from nothing and became one of the most famous men in Victorian Britain. He started working in a mill, by the way, at the age of 10. He had a very hard life. Let me just read a passage from this book describing David Livingstone's childhood. At the age of 10, I went to the factory as a piecer. With part of my first week's wages, I purchased rudiments of Latin and studied the language for many years with unabated ardour at an evening school which met between the hours of 8 and 10. Right, here we are, a child of 10, working 6 in the morning to 8 at night, then going to night school and teaching himself Latin. That's a child of 10, yeah? Right the way through, all through his childhood and teenage years, and finally managed to qualify as a doctor. What a fantastic example for modern youth. It now appears, alas, that the statue of David Livingstone, which stands next to Glasgow Cathedral, has been found to be problematic, as they say. A report commissioned in the wake of the Black Lives Matter disorders a couple of years ago has identified various statues in Glasgow linked to the slave trade, one of which is David Livingstone's. In the description to this video, I give a link to a news item about this madness. Before looking at it, though, I wonder if any viewers can guess what possible benefits David Livingstone is said to have derived from slavery, and why it might be a good idea to pull down his statue as a result. Remember, he came from an extraordinarily poor background, started work in a factory 14 hours a day at the age of 10. How did he or his family benefit from slave trade, do you think? Well, you won't guess. As I say, he worked in that mill at the age of 10 from 6 in the morning to 8 at night. Well, according to the report produced by the University of Glasgow, it was very likely that the mill was using cotton from the West Indies, which would mean that young David benefited from slavery, because without that cotton from the West Indies there would have been no mill and he wouldn't have been able to get that job at 14 hours a day. This meant that he would not have been able to buy that Latin textbook, study medicine and so on. He owed it all ultimately to slavery. I am hoping, although I doubt that my hopes are well founded, that this madness will reach a peak soon and then begin to decline. In the meantime, we must ask ourselves how much more of our history and culture we are prepared to see thrown on the scrap heap in this way.